August 1940. The Germans bomb 5 British radar stations in a single morning, and then they stop, and Britain survives. In this video, the invisible weapon that won the Battle of Britain, not the Spitfire, not Churchill, a chain of ugly steel towers and one catastrophic German mistake. Reichsmarshal Göring ordered his men to stop attacking those towers. One decision, one afternoon. Some historians argue it was the single greatest blunder of World War II. By the end of this video, you'll know exactly why, and you'll wonder how close Britain came to losing everything. Most people think the Battle of Britain was won by Spitfire pilots, brave men, no question. But here is what the history books don't say loudly enough. By August 1940, the Royal Air Force was losing badly. German pilots were experienced, battle-hardened veterans. The Luftwaffe had more planes, more pilots, and they were flying from airfields in France, just minutes from the English coast. Britain had one card left to play, an invisible one. The British called it RDF, radio direction finding. The rest of the world would come to know it as radar, and it was already woven into the English coastline like a spiderweb, 21 towers stretching from the Orkney Islands to the English Channel. Today we're answering the question, how did radar win the Battle of Britain? And we're going to do it by walking you through the system, how it worked, what it could see, why it mattered, and then showing you the 3 moments that decided the whole war. Before we go further, hit that subscribe button. We cover one story like this every day. Don't miss the next one. The story starts in 1935. A Scottish physicist named Robert Watson Watt gets a question from the British Air Ministry. Can radio waves be used as a weapon, a death ray that would stop German aircraft cold? Watson Watt's answer was blunt. No, a death ray won't work. But those same radio waves bounced off a plane can tell you where it is. That realization changed everything. By 1936, the Air Ministry had funded the first prototype. By 1937, they had 5 stations operational along the East Coast. And by the summer of 1940, when Hitler turned his eyes toward England, they had 21. A continuous chain of steel towers stretching from Scotland to Cornwall. The British called it chain home, and it was not elegant technology. The transmitter towers stood 360 feet tall, the receivers another 240. They broadcast on frequencies between 22 and 30 megahertz, which, by modern standards, is roughly as sophisticated as an AM radio. The Germans actually developed better radar than this, shorter wavelengths, rotating dishes, more precise. But Britain's radar had one advantage that mattered more than precision. It was already there, already operational, already integrated into a command system, and the range was extraordinary. Chain Home could detect a German bomber formation at 120 miles, 120 miles out over the English Channel. At that range, a German Heinkel He-111 was still 12 minutes from the English coast, 15 minutes before it reached an RAF airfield. 15 minutes is an eternity in a fighter scramble. It is the difference between a Spitfire already climbing and a Spitfire still sitting on the ground when the bombs fall. Here is the part that almost nobody talks about. Radar alone was not enough. Think about it. You detect a German formation at 120 miles, a blip on a cathode ray tube. An operator somewhere on the coast knows Germans are coming. How does that information get to a Hurricane pilot sitting in a cockpit at RAF Biggin Hill and get there in less than 5 minutes? Air Chief Marshal Hugh Dowding had a plan for that. Dowding was not a flashy man. He was methodical, precise, the kind of officer who wrote memos instead of giving speeches. And in the 1930s, while other men were focused on building more fighter planes, Dowding was building something harder to see. A network. Here is how it worked. Chain Home radar operators detected a formation. They immediately phoned that data, bearing estimated numbers, altitude to a filter room at Headquarters Fighter Command in Bentley Priory, northwest of London. Filter room staff correlated the radar reports with sightings from the Royal Observer Corps civilian spotters with binoculars stationed across the countryside. They assigned each raid a track number. Then they phoned it down to group operations rooms. Group operations rooms, there were 4 of them, fed the track to sector stations, and sector stations had radio telephone contact with the pilots in the air. Each link in that chain operated in under 2 minutes, from radar operator to pilot briefing, under 2 minutes. In the filter room and the operations rooms, the work was done by young women. members of the Women's Auxiliary Air Force, the WAFS. They sat around a large flat map table. Using croupier-style rakes, they pushed colored blocks across the map, each block representing a German formation, updated in real time. A clock on the wall had a rotating set of colored sectors, red, yellow, blue, each sector representing 5 minutes. The counters on the table were colored to match the clock. If a counter stayed one color too long, it meant the information was going stale and the controller needed to act. Station commanders and group controllers stood on a raised gallery, looking down at this living map. They could see every German raid, every RAF squadron, every airfield at the same moment. No radio chatter, no confusion, just intelligence, clean, structured, centralized. The Germans had no equivalent, none at all. Luftwaffe commanders flying over England were essentially blind once they crossed the Channel. They relied on pre-flight briefings and dead reckoning, and they were constantly surprised, intercepted by British fighters who appeared to come out of nowhere, because from their perspective, the British did appear out of nowhere. A fighter squadron scrambled on exact bearing and altitude, climbing at full power to exactly the right altitude, looked like wizardry. The Germans thought the British had more planes than they actually possessed. In some engagement records, Luftwaffe intelligence estimated 3 times the actual RAF strength. Radar and the Dowding system made 100 planes fight like 300. The Germans were not fools. By early August 1940, Luftwaffe intelligence knew about the radar towers. They could see them from the air. German scientists even identified the frequencies Chain Home broadcast on. They understood, at least partially, that those towers were watching them. And so, on August 12, 1940, the Luftwaffe launched its most ambitious coordinated strike of the battle so far. The target, Chain Home itself, 15 Junkers 88 bombers, fast, reliable, accurate, descended on Ventnor radar station on the Isle of Wight. Ventnor was the most important station in the southern chain. It sat 750 feet above sea level on chalk cliffs. Its transmitters could see deep into France. 72 high-explosive bombs fell on Ventnor that morning. 72. The station went dark. Simultaneously, Junkers 88s hit stations at Pevensey, Dunkirk and Rye. The entire southern radar chain, the eyes of Fighter Command, was under attack. For a few hours there was a hole in the British radar screen, a gap stretching across the Isle of Wight. If the Luftwaffe had pushed through that gap with a coordinated raid, it could have hit RAF sector stations, the nerve centers of the Dowding system, without warning. The damage would have been catastrophic, but the attack lost momentum. The Germans didn't follow through, and here is what made the British system so resilient. Within 5 days of Ventnor going offline, a mobile emergency radar unit was operational at Bembridge, just miles away. A portable radar station, truck-mounted, ready to deploy anywhere on the coast. The gap closed. The chain held. On August 18th, what historians now call the hardest day, the Germans tried again. Ventnor went off the air completely. 136 British aircraft were destroyed or damaged that day. 100 German aircraft were lost. It was the bloodiest single day of the entire Battle of Britain, and in the operations room at Bentley Priory, the Woolworth plotters kept pushing counters across the map. The system bent. It did not break. Now we get to the moment that decided everything. It is approximately August 13th, 1940. Hermann Göring, Reichsmarshal of the Luftwaffe, the second most powerful man in Nazi Germany, sits down to review the radar attack campaign. His bombers have hit 5 radar stations. None appear to be permanently destroyed. The British keep fixing them. The attacks are costly in aircraft. And Göring is impatient. He does not fully understand what these towers do. His intelligence staff has failed to convey the true function of Chain Home, and so Göring makes a decision. He will stop attacking radar stations, his exact words, recorded in Luftwaffe planning documents. It is doubtful whether there is any point in continuing the attacks on radar sites, in view of the fact that not one of those attacked has so far been put out of action. Read that sentence again. Not one has been put out of action. He is half right. But the Luftwaffe had never concentrated enough force for long enough on a single station to destroy it permanently. They hit and moved on. They never sent in follow-up raids. They never attacked the landlines that connected radar to Fighter Command. Göring's intelligence staff apparently never told him that the real vulnerability was not the towers, but the underground filter rooms, the telephone exchanges, the sector operations centers, targets that were far more fragile and far harder to rebuild. Attack those, and the Dowding system goes blind even if every radar tower stands. Instead, Göring shifted the campaign. He ordered the Luftwaffe to focus on destroying RAF airfields and to begin bombing London itself. The Blitz was beginning. The switch to London gave Fighter Command exactly what it needed: time to breathe, time to repair, time to replace lost pilots. Historian Stephen Bungay, author of The Most Dangerous Enemy, still considered the definitive single-volume history of the battle, later wrote that had the Germans maintained their radar attacks with proper fighter escort, they could, in his words, have beaten the RAF. One man's decision, one afternoon, one sentence in a planning document, and the war changed. Let's make this concrete. Let's go inside one day to see how the system actually worked in combat. August 18, 1940. 12:45 in the afternoon. The radar station at Dover picks up a contact. 6 separate concentrations of enemy aircraft assembling over the Pas de Calais. More than 300 German aircraft in total. Bombers, fighters, Stukas. The largest single formation the Luftwaffe had sent that summer. The Dover operator phones the contact to Bentley Priory. The filter room assigns track numbers. The WAF plotters push colored blocks onto the map. The duty controller reads the picture bearing, altitude, estimated strength, and reaches for the phone. By 12:52, 3 RAF squadrons are scrambling. They do not wait to see the Germans. They fly to a position, a specific bearing and altitude given to them by the controller. The controller knows exactly where the Germans are. The Germans do not know where the British are. At RAF Kenley, the sector station is the primary German target. Low-level Dornier 17 bombers come in at just 50 feet above the ground below radar cover, hoping to slip through. 9 bombers, 9 tons of bombs between them, 4 direct hits on Kenley's hangars. The operations room is hit, telephone lines are cut, Kenley is badly damaged, but the fighters are already in the air, already warned, already positioned. Of those 9 low-level Dorniers that attacked Kenley, 6 are shot down within minutes, 6 out of 9. The Dornier crews, who thought they had achieved surprise, fly into a wall of intercepting fighters. The formation is destroyed. Without radar, without the Dowding system, those fighters might have been scrambled too late or scrambled in the wrong direction. The Dorniers might have hit Kenley, withdrawn and survived. And without sector stations, Fighter Command goes blind, even if all the radar towers stand. If you're finding this useful, hit that like button right now. It helps us keep making these videos. Let's step back from the individual day and look at the numbers, because the numbers are where the story becomes undeniable. Without radar, the RAF would have needed to keep fighters in the air continuously patrolling the coast, waiting for Germans to appear. The French tried a version of this. The French were overrun in 6 weeks. Continuous patrol burns through engines, burns through fuel, wears out pilots. You cannot do it for months. With radar, RAF fighters only flew when there was a target to intercept. Ground crews got time to refuel, rearm and maintain aircraft. Pilots got time to rest. Dowding rationed his squadrons carefully, rotating exhausted units north to Scotland to recover. He could do this because he had 15 minutes of warning. Without that warning, no squadron could leave the front. Exhaustion would have won the battle for Germany. The numbers from the battle itself tell the story clearly. Between July 10th and October 31st, 1940, the Royal Air Force lost 1,047 fighter aircraft. The Luftwaffe lost 1,887. RAF kill ratio, nearly 2-to-1 in favor of Britain. The RAF's kill ratio was the kill ratio of a side with a structural advantage, the ability to concentrate force at exactly the right place. That structural advantage was the Dowding system, and the Dowding system began with radar. There is one more number that matters. The Ventnor radar station went offline for several days in August. During that time, Fighter Command suffered its worst losses of the entire battle. The correlation is direct. Radar down, losses up. Radar restored, losses stabilize. The data makes the case the historians make with words. There is a human dimension here that deserves to be named. The young women of the Women's Auxiliary Air Force, the Walade AFS, were not simply moving colored blocks on a table. They were tracking men's lives. The blocks they pushed were squadrons. Each one represented 12, 15, 20 fighter pilots. They knew by the colors on the clock whether those men had enough fuel to stay airborne, and they kept pushing blocks, calling coordinates, reading the map under pressure that most of us will never understand. Some of these WAAF operators were in their late teens. They had volunteered for a job the Air Ministry barely believed a woman could do, and they were excellent at it. Some of the women stayed at their stations during bombing raids, phoning coordinates while bombs fell outside. They were not armed. They had no means of defense. They stayed because someone had to. The pilots flying those intercepts were extraordinary. They were brave in ways that defy description, but even they acknowledged the debt. RAF pilot testimony collected after the battle consistently praised the ground controller system. They talked about the strange confidence of flying to a position instead of a guess, of climbing through cloud and knowing on the controller's word that Germans would be there when they broke into clear air. Radar had turned air combat from a lottery into a science. We opened with a question. The Germans bombed the radar stations. They damaged them. Several went off the air. And then Göring ordered his men to stop. Why? Because Hermann Göring looked at the bombed towers and concluded they weren't working. He measured success by whether the towers fell down. He did not understand that the towers were not the weapon. The network was the weapon. The filter room was the weapon. The telephone cables running underground were the weapon. The WAAF plotters at Bentley Priory were the weapon. The towers were just the front door. He attacked the front door, decided it was too tough, and walked away. The RAF won the Battle of Britain because of courage, no question. The Spitfire pilots were real. Their sacrifices were real. Their skill was extraordinary. But courage without information is blind. And those pilots had information. 15 minutes of warning, precise bearings, altitude calls from controllers who could see the whole picture. The men who flew deserved better odds than bravery alone. Chainholm gave them those odds. Britain's radar network was the world's first integrated air defense system. Every modern air defense, the American NORAD network, Patriot missile batteries, Israeli Iron Dome, South Korean KMEAs, built on the same principle. Detect early, share information, concentrate force at the point of contact. Robert Watson Watt's 1935 memo was the blueprint for all of it, and there is a harder lesson here. Göring lost not because he lacked the power to win. He lost because he did not understand what he was fighting. The most dangerous enemy is not the one you can see. It's the one whose capabilities you have completely failed to grasp. Next time, we're going inside another British secret weapon from the same war, one that no German ever saw coming, and one that cost more lives to build than to deploy. Subscribe now